Session 6 is going to be dealing with negotiating great contracts. And let me say that there are going to be some skills required in negotiating, developing a script, knowing what benefits we need to attach to our presentation. You should always be closing. And let me say this, anytime that you have a reluctant buyer who's having a difficult time making decisions, or they're asking questions that are negative, what you need to say is that we need to overcome these objections that they've got. And the easiest way to do that is first agree with them, then clear the air to make sure that that's the only objection they got by asking that. And then the last thing we have to do is we've got to circle back around and make sure we answer that original objection. In other words, we've got to find a way to overcome it. And when we're talking about these reluctant buyers, just make sure that we're continuously asking questions that's going to yield a yes answer. Motive is probably the number one reason that people purchase, and there are a number of motives that we look at and say these are important issues. Personal space, prestige, security, and especially family security. Those are all hot buttons and motives why people buy. The process of selling, I think what we have to do right now is understand that what the selling process is, but also understand that buyers sometimes have a very difficult time making decisions. The reason they have a hard time making decisions is there is what we call a fear factor. In other words, there's something that they're afraid of that's preventing them from making a decision. It causes them to procrastinate. You sit there and watch a buyer who is taking their time and trying to make a decision. You feel like it's the right house. They just can't quite come to grips with making that offer. Trust me, that procrastination to me is a sign that there's a fear somewhere and that you've got to find what that fear is and that you've got to overcome that fear. It's the number one obstacle that we have to deal with. Sometimes we have to also say that what are the basic steps in closing? I think one of the very first things that we have to do is recognize buying signs. And you can always tell the buying signs. They're starting to move their furniture in. They're starting to make comments that are positive comments. What that tells me is that they like the property, but they've got to maneuver their way through to make sure it's the right property. Also, we talked about different types of questions that we can ask during the process of selling. We talk about alternative or alternate of choice. Alternative choice questions simply give them a choice of this or that. Is 2 o'clock going to be okay, or would 5 o'clock be better? When we talk about active questions, we're talking about, of these two choices of what we have now, which one do you see yourself in? And then when you talk about tie downs, a tie down is an excellent question where you've heard them say a positive thing about the house. For instance, they say, the kitchen is really a nice kitchen. Later on, you might want to come back and say, you know what, this is one of the nicest kitchens I think I've seen in a while. Don't you agree? Or what do you think? In other words, what you're trying to do is get them to confirm something that you've already heard. The open-end question. Now let me talk to you about the open-end question because this can be tricky sometimes. If a buyer says, and let's just use an example, they want a great deal. Well, I don't know what a great deal really means. I mean, it could mean any number of things. So when you hear somebody say, make a statement, and you want them to explain what they just said, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. You can say, would you explain that? But there's a better technique to it. What I've learned is that you can do it very delicately. You can simply tilt your head one way or the other and say, a good deal? Kind of your brows are curled just a little bit, and you're trying to ask them that question that you're concerned that you don't know. A good deal? Then they will go into some type of discussion about what they consider to be a good deal. At least most cases they will. Just make sure that all these questions that we use in here, if you'll start practicing this, I promise you, it'll make you a better sales associate. And with that said, this is all we have in the negotiating part. So what I'd like to do right now, I'd like to review with you those areas of critical concern. 3 steps to overcome objections by a reluctant buyer: agree, ask, and answer. Fear is the greatest obstacle to overcome with buyers. Fear causes procrastination. A tie-down question asks your customer to confirm a positive. An open-end question requires your customer to expand a statement. And that's all we have for this particular section.